Hope everybody's doing well. Let me see if I can get this thing started off here. So the first question I saw from Mr. Herrera from EPA was, why so serious? Well, Ryan, you know I'm always serious. There's no time for levity in the transportation energy markets. But as Amanda said, we are coming from all of our remote locations. So as a disclaimer, if a 5.5-year-old blonde starts taking over the screen, I'm at home with my daughter, and that's just a pleasant surprise for everybody if that does happen. But I think I got her well focused on television and a coloring book, so hopefully we're okay. There was a question, we're going to talk about future demand forecasts based on current situations. I don't think that's really possible right now. I think there's so much uncertainty going on and so many variables still yet to be known that any type of forecast you see on future demand and what the impact's going to be are probably premature and very most likely absolutely wrong. So I'm going to touch a little bit on the current situation, but as Amanda said, I really want to focus on where the market was at the beginning of 2020 before all of the current situation transpired. And I really think that over a period of time, we're going to transition back to that reality to a large extent. And so I still think it's valid for as we look towards the second half of 2020, beginning 2021, I think some of the fundamentals will be the same. I will touch on a couple of things I think may change depending on how this whole learning environment that we're going through right now with the remote working environments and remote education, how that might influence travel behavior in the future. But that's really all conjecture and speculation, but sometimes that's fun as well. So real quick, I always show this. This is our current board of advisors. As you can see, it's a very diverse group. I rely on these individuals and these companies to provide us guidance in terms of what research the Fuels Institute does and provide me kind of a check to make sure that if I'm saying something that's not quite in line with what they're seeing, they bring me back to the center and help me and the Fuels Institute as a whole stay right where we need to be in terms of providing objective perspective on the market. It is important to always note that I don't speak on behalf of any of these companies. So anything coming out of my mouth today is my words and not on behalf of any of these organizations that form the leadership of the Fuels Institute. But we do rely on them very much for our direction and to make sure we're doing the things we need to be doing to answering questions the market is asking. So we're going to talk about demand destruction. We're going to talk about liquid fuel diversification. We're going to talk about the electric market and some of the charging infrastructure issues facing the market as we start moving towards the electrified powertrain market. But again, it's all going to be couched in terms of context. I really want to provide context to the news we're hearing, the developments that are happening in the market, what we're seeing on the streets. If we don't have context, it's very easy to get lost in rabbit holes and down paths that lead us to speculative outcomes rather than tangible, real meaningful inputs to your business and what the market's going to happen. But right now, this is the current situation. We've got the coronavirus issue, which is really hampering demand across the world, whether it be airline travel, shipping, or domestic travel as we go into lockdown in a lot of communities. And we definitely are working from home and social distancing. That is having an impact on demand. But at the same time, you have Russia and Saudi Arabia engage in a very aggressive price war. And what we've seen is since the beginning of March, Brent futures are down 48% and RBOB futures are down 65%. Now, I pulled these this morning from Bloomberg. When I pulled this first 2 days ago, RBOB futures were down 79%. They were trading up 41 cents the other day. So we're seeing the market try to get their arms around what's happening and is real skittish. We don't know what's going to happen with the economy, don't know how long we're going to be working from home, how long our restaurants and our businesses are going to be shut down. We really don't have a clue. The president has said his goal would be to reopen the country around Easter Sunday. That's a goal. He's not saying he's going to do that. That's his goal, but that's still 3 weeks away. So we're looking at a situation where we may have 3, 6, 8 more weeks, 10 more weeks possibly of depressed demand. These benchmarks are going to move. Now, I will point out, if you look at the RBOB futures down there the last 2 days, it's recovered a little bit. Not much, but a little bit. And crude oil has stopped its free fall the last day or two. What happens after the stimulus package is passed? What happens after the market starts recovering? We don't know, but this is the current situation. Now, I looked at history to kind of give us an idea of what this might do to gas prices. And we've always said retail prices are going to follow oil prices. That being said, there is a lag in the transition. So when oil prices move, everybody thinks, well, the pump prices should move immediately. That's not possible. the oil prices move, then wholesale prices move with the rack, which is that RBOB futures contract, and then it starts transitioning to retail. Now, retailers have product in their storage tanks from last week, much higher price. They may not be able to pass on these discounts immediately because they're still paying for that inventory, and they're looking at how we get to that point. So they're waiting for the impact to come in. EIA did a study back around 2001, 2002, and they said it could take as many as 12 weeks for a change in the oil price to be reflected at the pump. That goes up and down. And so we're seeing the prices of retail come down now, especially as demand cuts. But it's going to take a little while. But if you take a look here, one of the things I point out is back in the Great Recession, 2007, 2008, oil peaked at $141 in the middle of 2008 and dropped to $35 at the end of 2008. That was a 5.5 month decline. Again, we had a major drop in 2014 from 113 to 47, but again, that was a 7-month decline. What we're experiencing now is really unprecedented. The absolute bottoming out of 50% value within a couple of days. Now, these are weekly averages, so it's not up to the current price point, which is much lower than $34, but we're seeing a very big change. Now, I read an article today. The expectation, this is temporary. And when we get back to business, the prices are going to stabilize. It really depends on what Russia and Saudi Arabia do. So we got to keep an eye on that. It's not getting the coverage that coronavirus is, but it is a huge fundamental factor in the global economic health and the impact on transportation overall. We look at where retail prices have ranged since 2006 when the oil prices in different $5 buckets. You can see that as oil prices go up, retail prices go up, and you see the range there. So right now we're in the $25 to $35 range, and that's usually about $1.60 to about $2.25 on the average weekly national retail price point. So it just gives you a historic benchmark about where retail prices might go if crude oil stays low. And the reason this is important is we start talking about the demand for alternative transportation fuels. Consumers shop around for better prices or alternatives when prices are painful. When prices are $2 or $2.20, they don't shop around very much. And so we need to pay attention to that, because if the oil price stays low and if retail prices stay low, even as we start transitioning back to a healthier, more normally activated economy, the demand for alternative transportation solutions by consumers is not going to be very strong. And so if we're waiting for that consumer to pull new technology into the market at a rapid pace, is likely going to be hampered by low prices at the pump, and that's something we need to pay attention to. We also need to think about vehicle miles traveled. And I mentioned I'd allude to some speculative forecasting here. I'm not going to forecast, but I've been playing with this idea that we're all now working from home, working remotely. And there are a lot of employers for years who have not supported telecommuting. Well, now we're testing and learning. We're exploring new means of connecting and being productive while we're not in our offices. This could spur a rethinking of policies dedicated to work from home. I believe the vast majority of vehicle miles traveled by the individual is non-discretionary. It is getting to work. It's taking kids to school. It's taking them to their different activities, running errands, going to shopping, going grocery shopping. It's not necessarily going on road trips. It's a very small part of our travel. Well, right now we've taken all that off the table. If we come back to a market where telecommuting becomes more pronounced and supported, let's assume the average American starts working from home just 1 day per week. The impact on miles traveled, fuel consumption, and it's important to note, emissions could go down 15 to 20% just by implementing a 1 day from home work policy. And that's something I think is much more viable than it was 3 weeks ago. I think we're starting to see the ability of us to be productive when we're not in the same physical location. How have the shutdown affected VMT? You know, you look at the national VMT, look back at the recession. We had a massive work stoppage, a lot of people not working, high prices at the pump for the first few months. We saw almost a 3% drop in VMT. That's really the only decline we've seen in this chart only goes back to 1990, but we did a publication a couple of years ago, went all the way back to like 1930. We have not seen a decline in VMT except during that period. We're going to see a blip. I do believe we're going to see a decrease in vehicle miles traveled. How long that lasts, we'll see in the next couple months or years. INRIX, I saw a report this morning came across my desk. I thought it was pretty interesting. They did an analysis of what's going on in Seattle, and this is showing the regional vehicle miles traveled by day compared to typical. And you look in February through March, beginning of March, you're looking at 98 to 103, 107% of the typical miles traveled any given day. But you look at the last 2 weeks and we're down to 74% of the typical miles traveled. This is at the crux of the shutdown in Seattle, where they put major restrictions on gatherings. Maybe we'll see that change, don't know. But you take a look at the next chart that NREX put out there in terms of the trips downtown in the morning, and the line they put it there is when Amazon and Microsoft started work from home instructions. You see the reduction in trips downtown. Pretty significant, 50% drop in the number of trips to downtown Seattle. This is, I believe, indicative of what we're going to see in metropolitan areas throughout the country that are starting to shut down or really restrict mobility and gatherings. It's going to be temporary, but the long-term implications, as I mentioned before, what we're learning about capabilities to not necessarily be in the same physical location all the time, could have long-term ramifications for the overall transportation sector, and it's something we need to be paying pretty close attention to, because this could be very exciting. Take what's going on now, take the pain, take the anxiety and the disruption to our lives off the table, and think about what a change in the way we interact, a change in the way we work going forward, what that might do to our society, what that might do to our travel, to our transportation energy needs, to our environmental performance. All those things are on the table, and it could be an opportunity for us to really restrike a new path forward and see what happens. So with that, we'll move into demand destruction. I'll see if I can, while I'm doing this, try to look at some of the questions coming up. Yeah, we'll make the presentation slides will be available, and the recording will be available as well for you guys to access afterwards. So we record all the presentations. So looking back at where we were at the beginning of the year, okay, demand destruction, it's not all about electrification. We were seeing a decline in gasoline and diesel fuel demand the last couple of years, and it's not because of electrification, it's because of fuel economy. What's going on here? I answered that question. I seem to have lost my control. There we go. So since 2000, light duty trucks and passenger cars have improved 38% fuel efficiency, more miles per gallon because of technological improvements, CAFE programs, but we've seen a significant improvement even since 2000 to 2017. And I'll note, this is without any type of electrification. This is just technology they've brought in. The other thing that's happened, according to EPA, is we've seen every single class of vehicle, pickups, vans, SUVs, CUVs, sedans, decrease their CO2 emissions, increase their miles per gallon. We have seen dramatic improvements in the market, and that needs to be celebrated. So often improvements are viewed as, well, that's just not enough. We have to take credit for what's happened and recognize there's been improvements and progress, and then talk about how we capitalize on that going forward. If you take a look at where the CAFE program is now, EIA's annual energy outlook came out in January, and they looked at the CAFE program. They said, look, all we can do is model what's currently in place. The program goes to 2025. There's nothing on the books right now to extend any increases after that. So they held 2025 standards as they currently exist, static, and they still projected a 47% efficiency gain in light-duty vehicle fleet by 2040. So we've had a 38% improvement over the last 20 years. Over the next 20 years, they're projecting another 47% efficiency gain. That's assuming we don't increase CAFE standards in the future, which I think is probably unlikely. I think we'll see an increase over the next 20 years beyond 2025. But as of right now, this is what they're projecting. That is a huge impact on demand. And when we think about the impact on fuel retailers, I always go back to trips. Does this mean we're going to have a 47% decline in trips? And absolutely not. All the auto engineers I've spoken with say, hey, you know, John, when we improve efficiency, we're going to shrink that gas tank because that helps us save weight and reduces our GV, our gross vehicle weight, and allows us to get more efficient. They're not going to reduce it one for one. So they're not going to take a vehicle that's now getting 50 miles per gallon and you're only going to get 250 mile range. So your range is going to extend. That's going to reduce trips to the retail outlet, but it's not going to be a 50% drop. So there is some wiggle room there, but it's important to know that under current regulatory schemes, we're looking at a pretty significant decrease in miles traveled per gallon, which is going to translate into a reduction in gallons demanded. The heavy-duty diesel fleet, same way. There is a fuel economy standard for the freight market, and the projection from AEO 2020 is a 30% efficiency gain by 2040. which is, again, a very big jump in terms of overall efficiency for our freight market. And when the Trump administration released their safer vehicles proposal a couple years ago, a lot of people called me and say, hey, John, is this going to end improvements in efficiency? And my response to them is the same as it is now. No. Regardless of what happens in the domestic CAFE program or fuel economy standards, the automakers are producing vehicles for the world. They're bringing technologies to bear to satisfy global requirements. Within the next couple of years, 90% of the vehicles sold in the world will be sold into a market with some sort of fuel economy or emissions program. The automakers are not going to abandon making progress for the global market just because a domestic policy somewhere is eased up. Sure, they may slow down their aggressive trend to bring these technologies to market quickly, but I don't think they're going to slow it down because it helps them comply with global standards, but it also satisfies their consumer demand for more efficient vehicles. All that said, take into consideration the initial projection of vehicle miles traveled going up, maybe as much as 12%. Take a look at CAFE improvements, and you take a look at Olivia. Then you take a look at what that means to demand. Gasoline demand could go down by 26%, diesel demand down by 15%, depending on where the oil price is. I did the flex case here based upon a low price oil market and a high price oil market, but you see the range there. Now, take everything that's happened in the last couple of months off the table. This is what it was at the beginning of the year. But regardless, I think we need to be prepared for a decline in overall liquid fuel demand over the next 20 years. Now, when I mentioned the technology advancements and the pace at which the automakers have achieved their efficiency gains, how they've been doing it. Well, they've been taking new technologies and bringing them to market pretty quick, from gasoline direct injection to stop-start technology, turbo-boosted engines. These are technologies, variable valve timing. All these things are, some of them are relatively new, and they came to market quick. Some of these technologies went from 0 market penetration 15 years ago to 96, 98% penetration now. One of the things I think is really interesting, you look at the transmissions. You ever rode a bicycle? And I ride bikes a lot. The more gears you have, the easier it is to climb a hill, the easier it is to maintain your momentum because you can match your power output with an ultimate gear ratio to give you the best efficiency. We are now in a market where 58% of the vehicles sold in the United States are equipped with 7 or more gears. That includes the continuously variable transmission. We are matching better transmissions with the engines we have to get more efficient, and that's a great progress going forward. It used to be 4 gears was your standard. 4 gears don't even exist anymore. So we're looking at 7 and more, with some coming out in 10 and 11 gears. And I think that's going to make a big difference going forward. So we've achieved the economy efficiencies without changing our powertrains, still using internal combustion engines. And that's important because I show this chart almost every single presentation I do. Turning over the fleet takes a long time. The time I wrote this, there were about 244 million registered light-duty vehicles in the United States, around 255, 260, depending on the numbers you use. But using EIA's forecast at the time, if we added a new technology, whatever it is, to every single vehicle sold January 1, 2018 and beyond, that means 100% market conversion immediately, government mandate, it would take 9 years to turn over 50% of the fleet. That means the internal combustion engine is going to be here for a long time. Because even if we were to go 100% electric tomorrow, which is not feasible, it would take us 9 years to turn over the fleet. And the ICEs we're selling now will still be in the road for another 20 years. So internal combustion engine is not going anywhere. It's going to start yielding some market share. It's going to take quite a bit of time. And then I point out to this quote that I read in Automotive Engineering on SAE magazine last summer. I thought it was important because General Motors is really making a lot of noise about we're going electric. They had a great announcement a couple of weeks ago about a 400-mile range battery with a new battery stack. They're really putting a lot of emphasis on electrification. But their VP of Global Product Integrity commented that, you know what, the way things are being covered right now, you think we've stopped everything and everything is electric, and that's not the way things are going to develop. We still have a tremendous amount of work to do on ICEs. And that's because the transition to something new, if it's not mandated, is going to take a long time. Even if it's mandated, it's going to take a long time. So we have to make progress with the vehicles consumers are buying today in order to make progress on our environmental obligations to reduce emissions and improve efficiency. And so we need to pay attention to the internal combustion engine future. Olivia, I can't do it right now. So the new internal combustion engines will be using new blends. Okay, I believe we're going to see a change in the liquid fuel market, even though the liquid fuel market is going to be strong. Last year, some automakers and refiners are trying to push legislation to change the octane standard of the gasoline in the market. That legislation did not progress, but there's still a desire to increase the octane in the gasoline pool to enable more efficient engine design. And that's scientifically valid. The co-optima program at Department of Energy did the analysis, said if you were to use an internal combustion engine, downsided and boosted with an increase in compression ratio with a 98 Ron fuel and a sensitivity, you could get maybe as much as 7.5% efficiency gain. That is a big improvement. How we get there is challenging, and that's probably the biggest issue. Is how do you deliver high octane fuel to enable these more efficient engines? And we'll have to see if that plays out. But there is an opportunity there to deliver more efficiency with liquid fuels and internal combustion engines. I think also policies are going to drive a change in liquid fuel composition. Low carbon fuel standards, California is the only one with a real solid one right now, but there's a lot of spreading. Oregon has one, Washington's been trying, Midwestern governors have a memorandum of understanding to develop one themselves, and there's a program, the Transportation Climate Initiative in the New England area that has a LCFS component to it. LCFS programs are spreading or are likely to spread. And if they do, that opens up an opportunity for biofuels. If you take a look at California's experience, the California Air Resources Board believes that in 2020, the credits required to comply with the low carbon fuel standard will largely be met with biofuels. They actually think about 77% of all credits generated under the LCFS program will be through biodiesel, renewable diesel, or some sort of ethanol. If LCFS programs spread, biofuels could play a much more important role in the liquid fuel market and have a greater impact on achieving these low carbon intensity objectives of the policies. We're also seeing a spread of alternative fuel availability. We have E15 in more than 2,000 stations, mid-level ethanol close to 1,000, E85 closing in on 4,000 stations now, according to the number I saw last week, and B20 growing. Now I have E0 up here because what's interesting is as the blends for biofuels have increased, so has the availability of E0. We don't know how many stores have E0. We don't know how many gallons are being sold. We're in the process, the fuel is to try to uncover that and understand that market a little bit better. But one number I did see is somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,500 stores are selling E0, which would match E85 and eclipse E15. So it's interesting to see how the market is changing. Consumers have more options, retailers have more options. How those fuels interact with the new engines to deliver greater efficiency remains to be seen, but it's something we need to pay attention to. The liquid fuel composition is going to change, and we need to be available to analyze that, understand it, and when possible, take advantage of it for either environmental purposes or economic purposes to benefit consumers. The E15 market's been one that's talked about a lot. And so I took a look at API had a report a couple years ago that I analyzed about vehicles that are warranted for E15. This is just warranties. This is not the EPA authorization for E15. This is just what vehicles are warranted. And you take a look at 2014, less than 60% of the new vehicles sold were warranted for E15. That makes sense. E15 wasn't even approved until 2011. So you've got a lag there, but what we're seeing now is about 90% of the vehicles sold in 2018, I suspect that's higher this year, were warranted for E15. In addition, if you take the EPA authorization for all vehicles manufactured 2001 or more recently, they are allowed by EPA to use E15. That number's in the 90% plus percentile of the vehicles on the road. So there's opportunities here. All opportunities take some time, but we're seeing this one develop, and there could be a growth in E15 availability and consumption over the next couple of years. In the diesel market, we got to pay attention to diesel fuel because the new engines have to be more efficient, and they're becoming more efficient, but they're doing it with a new design of the injector system in the engine that is much more susceptible to fuel impurities. The high pressure common rail diesel injector system is now injecting fuel into the piston chamber at 40,000 pounds per square inch or more, and the tolerances for impurities is 1 micron. That means that if you have an impurity in the diesel fuel that is more than 1 micron in diameter, it can foul the injector tip, foul the injector system, or if it gets through, it's being shot into the piston chamber like a bullet and could result in scarring and damage to the inside of the piston chamber wall. So we have a situation where the engines are more efficient, but much more sensitive, and that they're demanding a higher quality diesel fuel, and we're looking at how we achieve that. But take that to the next level. Now you have the environmental regulators looking at doing an ultra-low NOx program, which in and of itself is going to be extremely challenging to reduce the NOx emissions from diesel engines. But what they're also looking at is extending the estimated useful life of an engine. So right now, if I were to produce a heavy-duty diesel engine, I have to certify it to the current NOx standards, buy it again at 435,000 miles, and recertify it. Under the proposals we're seeing, that life expectancy could go from 435,000 miles to maybe 750,000 or 1 million miles, which means those engines are going to be pushing through a lot more diesel fuel during their useful life, and they still have to meet those ultra-low, tighter NOx standards in 1 million miles. This is a great opportunity for us to talk about diesel fuel, engine compatibility, and how we move forward as an industry overall to deliver what we need to deliver to meet our targets. But this is going to be a challenge that should not be underestimated, the difficulty of achieving it. So all that's about internal combustion engines. And like I said, internal combustion engines remain and will remain for a long time, but electrification is coming. Despite the slow roll that I think we're going to have, it's no doubt in my mind that we're going to have more electric vehicles on the road, and over the next 10 to 20 years, they're going to play a much more significant part of our transportation infrastructure than they do today. But I always start with Yoda. You must unlearn what you've learned. What we've been reading is that the electrification revolution is upon us now, but we need to take a look from context. Where are we really? I was at the LA Auto Show last year, and every single OEM presentation I went to was talking about by 2025, 2030, 40%, 60% of our models will be electrified. They didn't always say they'd be pure battery electric. They didn't say that they'd be plug-in or hybrid. They said electrified. And they never said how much production volume they'd represent. So if an OEM says by 2025, half of our vehicles are going to be electric, half of our vehicle models will be electric, will those vehicle models represent 50% of their production, 50% of their sales, or just 50% of their lineup with a smaller percentage of overall vehicles actually produced? If you look at this table on the side, it's from the International Energy Agency, of public statements from OEMs about what they plan to do with electrification. Very few are saying X% of our sales will be. A couple of them are, but not very many of them. They're talking about model availability because they know consumers have to buy them. And so you can make the offer of a technology, but if the consumer doesn't buy them, then what's going to happen to sales is kind of beyond your control. That being said, if we look at the growth of EV sales since 2015, we see a 30% increase, 26% increase, 75% increase since 2018. And in 2018, everybody thought, look at this. And a lot of people are telling me I was wrong because they said 75% growth, John. This is a nonstop revolution. Well, you look at 2019, we actually lost some ground. And there's a lot of speculation as to why. And I think from what I've looked at, what I've talked to people, I come down to maybe two major factors. One, I think when the Tesla Model 3 was announced, there was a lot of pent-up demand that was satisfied between 2017 and 2018 and beginning of 2019. When I ran these numbers in June 2019, battery electric vehicles themselves were up 96% over the first 6 months of 2018. And I believe a lot of that was the Tesla Model 3 orders being fulfilled and boosting those numbers. But at the same time, Tesla and General Motors both sold more than 200,000 electric vehicle units and are no longer getting the federal tax credit of $7,500. So I believe a combination of satisfied demand for the new Model 3, and I think the elimination of the tax credit for some of the most popular models on the market led to a slide in sales in the second half of 2019. I don't think that's going to be sustainable. I think we're going to see an uptick again 2020 and beyond, but I think it's important to note that this is not a well-oiled, mature market. This is a market that's developing. It's going to take some time to get to the market penetration that a lot of people are looking for. And this next slide kind of points that out. Since 2015, gasoline internal combustion engines have yielded 1.6% market share. Out of 17 million plus vehicles sold a year, we are averaging 92 to 94% of those vehicles are gasoline internal combustion engines. That cannot be ignored. That is the dominant, and you have to offer a product to the consumer that compels them to switch from what they've always done. And keep in mind, these vehicles now are a lot more efficient than they were 5 years ago. And so the consumer can buy a gasoline engine, getting 20, 25% more miles per gallon than they used to get. With gasoline selling at about $2 a gallon, the economic compulsion for them to seek out something new doesn't really exist. And so there's going to have to be a balancing of the technological operations, the capabilities, and the price between the electrified vehicles and the gasoline engine for the consumer to start saying, I need to start thinking about my options. When we take a look at what's happened in the non-gasoline powertrain share, we have seen the plug-in battery electric and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, they didn't change market share. They stayed at 1.9%, 2018 and 2019. Yet plug-in hybrids lost market share and battery electric vehicles gained. They swapped 2% market share. So we're seeing an increase in attention in the battery electric vehicles. Again, I think that could be a Tesla phenomena because there are many fewer electric vehicles than plug-in hybrids available on the market, but sales for electric vehicles are much stronger than plug-in hybrids. Again, I think these numbers are going to change. I think we're going to see a growth in market share for electrified plug-in vehicles in the next couple of years. And so I wouldn't sit back and go, it's all over. It's definitely not over. It's just the very beginning stages. Then I always go back to the same chart I said about market turnover. These boxes are built to scale. The big red box in the middle is registered light-duty vehicles in 2019. The box to the right is retired vehicles in 2019. EIA estimates about 5.5% to 6% of vehicles are retired every year. The blue box on the left is total internal combustion engine sold last year, and the little green box is total plug-in electric vehicles. It is going to take time. It's going to take scale to transition the red box to something more like the green box. And which is something we have to keep in mind. It is a big market, and right now we're dropping small pebbles into that puddle, and it's going to take a long time before we convert the market to something new. I did this analysis a couple of years ago that if we were to continue increasing sales 20 to 26% year over year of plug-in electric vehicles, what would that do to the market? If that were to continue through 2035, they'd capture 43% of new vehicle sales. But the turnover rate would only result in about 10.5% of vehicles on the road being plug-in electric. And so that's just another way of looking at the context that it's going to take a significant increase in sales to have a meaningful impact on the fleet. Over time, that will happen, but it's going to take time, so we have to pay attention to that. A quick snapshot of what the electric vehicle market in the United States looked like last year. I can't mention the Tesla Model 3, and it's not because I'm on board with Tesla, it's because it's a reality. The Model 3 represented 63.5% of all battery electric vehicle sales last year. When you add the Model X and the Model S, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 75, 80% of all the electric vehicles sold last year were Tesla. Now, we only sold 244,000 units from 18 models. The vast majority of those were Tesla. When you take a look at the plug-in hybrid market, much more diverse, 18 automakers, 32 models, but only 85,000 units sold. But you go to an auto show, almost every single automaker has a plug-in hybrid for sale. But think about this. From a consumer perspective, I would think a plug-in hybrid makes a lot of sense because you have that extended range. The range anxiety is gone. You get 20, 40 miles of all electric, and then you have an internal combustion engine to keep you going wherever you want to go. That seems to be a comfort for the consumer. But for the OEMs, they're building a car with two powertrains, so the cost is higher. I still believe the difference between battery electric and plug-in hybrid is all predicated on the popularity of the Tesla Model 3 over the last couple of years. And then that is going to evolve over time as new entrants come in, as market share for the other manufacturers start to gain traction. We'll see the diversification of the electric vehicle market accelerate. When we look at 2020, I did an analysis. I looked at Plug in America's Plugstar.com yesterday, and I did a search for electric vehicles for sale in my area, Northern Virginia, and what the MSRP and the range is. And this is a chart showing the range in miles and the MSRP after incentives available in my market. I looked at California, the incentives are a little stronger, so the price is a little bit lower. But this is what you're looking at. 24 models are available right now. 19 have ranges of 200 miles or more. If you exclude the three vehicles that have a price tag of $100,000 or more, the average price of vehicles who have 200-mile range is $53,000. That is a big chunk, and not every American family can afford that. So as we start looking at the future, if we expect electric vehicles to gain mass popularity, they're going to have to penetrate the younger market, the lower income market, the multi-unit dwelling, the apartment dwellers who don't have their own garages are going to look for charging in the market. So that's going to have to grow, but you're going to have to penetrate that. The price is going to have to come down to the mid-20s. You're going to have a range of 200 to 300 miles, and you're going to have rapid recharge time and recharging capabilities. All of that, I believe, is coming true. And you take a look at this next chart, the batteries are the #1 cost in electric vehicles. And look what's happened since 2010. We've seen a massive drop in the price of electric vehicle batteries by kilowatt hour, almost a 70% decline in the last 5 years in the price of those batteries. Now, as you get down to the lower numbers, incremental improvements can be much more difficult. So we'll see how fast that number continues to dwindle. You'll see that the declines in 2015 has slowed because we've made progress, but now we're looking at the last, couple inches, couple yards before we get to the end zone for a lower price. That's gonna be much more difficult. But I do believe that in the next 5 years, maybe sooner, an electric vehicle with 300-mile range, or General Motors saying 400-mile range, that can be purchased for under $30,000 without the tax credit, that can be recharged in less than 15 minutes. Tesla is saying that their version 3 of their supercharger is going to be able to deliver 150 miles in 5 minutes, I think it is, or 75 miles per 5 minutes of charging. That's getting to be equivalent to a liquid fuel refill, which is going to give consumers a lot of comfort that they can get the electricity they need to get to where they want to go. All those things are going to come together. And by 2030, the customer is going to start shifting. People in my generation might say, why would I want to buy an electric vehicle? People in the next generation are probably going to approach it with, why would I not? And so you could see a hockey stick approach in terms of sales picking up as technology meets consumer acceptability, prices come down, and become somewhat more competitive. Still, going to take a long time to shift over the market, but the fundamentals are there to enable that transition to occur. Now, charging infrastructure is important because if we don't have charging infrastructure to support the mass adoption through apartment dwellers, non-garage owning homeowners, then we're going to have a hurdle to provide the electricity to the customers we want. Now, you take a look at what's going on in terms of charging. You have level 1, that's your outlet in your house. Level 2 is kind of like the clothes drying outlet in your house, or a level 2 charger in a public garage area. DC fast charging. The real focus needs to be DC fast. I think that's the focus. If consumers are looking to have a reliable transportation with energy, DC fast is really where we need to go. The problem is we have not done much to build out the DC fast infrastructure. Of 30,000 stations in the US and Canada, I checked this number this morning, only 14% are DC fast chargers. And the number of stations has gone up in the last year, but that percentage, 14%, has not changed in the last year. We need to increase the DC fast charge penetration and provide customers that comfort. They can get meaningful charge in 5-10 minutes. From a fuel retailer perspective, putting my old hat on when I was with Nax, there's a lot of opportunity here. Right now, about 80% of charging is expected to occur at home or at the office, and only 20% en route around town. As we get people moving into apartments buying EVs, those apartments are not going to have enough charging ports for all the residents. So the opportunity to recharge at a gas station, a convenience store, or a grocery store, or a fast food restaurant are going to accelerate. And think about this. If most Americans drive 30, 40 miles a day, if you have a 250-mile range vehicle, you probably only need to charge it up once or maybe twice a week. And so we can go ahead and provide an opportunity to come in and charge and move forward with a meaningful range extension for 5 to 10-minute visit at one of these facilities twice a week. And so I think there's an opportunity. There's some costs associated with it, but there's opportunities to partner with people to defray your costs and make it. That's very nice, honey. Thank you very much. I'll be with you in a few minutes. Sorry, guys. But we have challenges. We have problems with siting regulations. Not all jurisdictions are leading into the regulatory structure the same way. We have method of sale. You're not allowed to resell kilowatt hours by kilowatt hours, yet Weights and Measures wants you to do it that way. So we need to figure those things out. And demand's very different. So what is the ROI to a site host? And we're trying to figure that out. The Fuels Institute announced the Electric Vehicle Council back in January, and 2 of the projects we're working on right now is try to understand the regulations, provide some guidance to those who want to make some regulatory adjustments, and provide best practices for regulations, facilitate the deployment of chargers, and then develop a site host education toolkit to help people navigate the process of getting into the charging business and what to expect as an ROI and best practices to make the most out of their investment so they can have a credible business case for moving into electric vehicle charging. When we take a look at the 3 DC fast chargers, there's CCS, which is SAE's standard, CHAdeMO, which is the Japanese, and then the Tesla standard. It's interesting. Tesla's making huge progress in terms of expansion rollout. Yet only Teslas can charge at Teslas. The other chargers have very different opportunities. So there are options. and site hosting to think about what options make most sense for them, what their market penetration is. If Tesla has 80% market share, maybe putting Tesla chargers makes a lot of sense. If you're looking for a broader diversity of an emerging market, maybe you need to move into one of the other models or diversify, but take a look at those. And the other thing is capacity. Right now, there's only one vehicle on the market that can charge at 350 kilowatts. That's the Porsche Taycan. It's about a $130,000 vehicle. Not everybody can afford that. That being said, 350 kilowatts is where the market is heading. You may not be able to recharge at 350 kilowatts with your electric vehicle today, but the electric vehicles in 5 to 6 years will likely be all able to charge at that rate, giving you the opportunity to deliver 100 to 150 mile range in 10 to 15 minutes. So think of when I talk to a site host, I got to talk to them about thinking about future-proofing your site, developing the infrastructure to support the future market, not the market today, because that market's going to evolve going forward. Cost of installing can be high. This is one model that was presented at the NAC show last year. An individual who's done a lot of installations. He said, you're looking at for 4 150 kilowatt charging spaces, you need 4.5 parking spaces dedicated to it, and you're looking at $150,000 per unit. Now, I talked to a couple other guys and said, look, if you've got the power coming into your site, you can put chargers out for $30,000, $40,000. But they're saying it's going to be a lot more than this. So it's important to figure out what all your options are. The range is high, and there's a lot of variability to it. Rocky Mountain Institute did a report earlier this year. I encourage people to read it because it really talks about the costs of installation and operating EV infrastructure is. And a lot of what they came out with is there's so much variability, but there's a lot of cost embedded in soft cost. That's a site acquisition, local building codes, regulation. In the report, they said they are aware of many sites that have been working on getting approval, going through the impact assessment, spending a lot of money on the regulatory process for a year, year and a half, before they finally realized this isn't worth it, and they pulled the plug. That's why regulatory streamlining is so important, but paying attention to all the various costs. Buying the charging cabinet's not the expensive part. It's all the things that go into preparing the site and getting it ready to offer the service is expensive. And that's where the industry can kind of come together and work together to streamline these processes to lower the cost of entry so that installing chargers for the future demand makes much more sense, is much more justifiable from an economic standpoint. Two major issues facing retailers is that method of sale, which I mentioned. You can't sell by kilowatt hours, so how are you going to make money? There's subscription-based, there's time of use base. You can sell by how long you're there. You can charge by the connecting charge. You can charge parking rates. There are a variety of ways to do it. There should be an easier way to do it. There's also consumer friction. You talk to some people who drive electric vehicles. They say, every time I go to charge, I have to download somebody else's platform. I have to upload my credit card. I have 4 or 5 different apps that I need to have in order to pay for my charging. Maybe there's a way to reduce consumer friction and create a ubiquitous platform that everybody can ride on or participate in to make this more seamless for the consumer and make it a better experience. So these are the things we need to be looking at as we start thinking about deploying a charging infrastructure to make it more effective and consumer friendly. Last slide here is my takeaways is this. Liquid fuel is going to continue to, demand is going to continue to decline. We're having efficiency is going to continue to gain, demand is going to go down. ICEs aren't going anywhere anytime soon. I think I'll be long dead before we stop selling internal combustion engines. But that doesn't mean they're going to be consuming the same fuel they've been consuming the last 100 years. So we need to be ready for potential change in fuel formulations. Electric vehicles are coming, but it's going to take time. And that is not a bad thing. That means the industry, the infrastructure, the consumers have the opportunity to evolve with the development of the EV market and provide a opportunity to have a much higher quality of living, much higher satisfaction experience when we start converting to electrified vehicles, and that's a good thing. So I always start off a lot of my presentations, don't believe everything you read. If you read a headline, ask the 5 or 6 questions that headline spurs, read through the article, then read 3 or more other articles to kind of justify what you're hearing. What you're hearing in the headlines is not always true. And the context in which these developments are happening is more important than any headline you're going to read. And with that, I will stop just talking nonstop and answer any questions that come up.
Thanks so much, John. That was really great. A couple people, and please feel free to utilize the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. But I see a couple questions here. One is that your equipment cost estimates for DCFC is about 2 times reality.
Yeah, Jim, and you and I chatted about this a couple weeks ago. You're right. It all depends on how you go about it, what your laid in options are. If you have the power supply to your market, to your store, and you don't need to have any cost of boosting the transformer capacity, your cost can be a lot lower. It all depends on how you're already set up, if you're ready to go, who your partners are, what your equipment is, who's helping you. You can defray a lot of these costs, and you also pointed in your question here that there's a tax credit. Yeah, there are tax credits on local incentives. So anybody interested in putting in a charger needs to explore all these things. What we're trying to do with this site host toolkit is provide guidance so that individual companies who are interested in putting in chargers can find the right answers. If you talk to one source, you're going to get one answer. Talk to another source, you're going to get another answer. The variability is wide. So it's really important that people ask the right questions and seek out multiple sources to ensure that they are getting the right answers and making the best decisions for their business.
John, can you talk a little bit more about the 350 kilowatt charging option you mentioned?
Yeah, the 350 kilowatt is really kind of where I think the industry standard is trying to head to. I've heard some talk about 500,000 kilowatts. Start talking about the heavy duty trucks, you're 1 to 2 megawatts, which is a scary amount of power. But the 350 will allow us to develop the battery packs on the vehicles to have that rapid recharge. And so we need to think about, I mentioned future proofing. If you're going to invest, take the high end that Jim pointed out, it's really high, $150,000, $200,000 per charging port. If you're going to have to invest that kind of money, you don't want to invest in technology that's going to be outdated in 3 years. You want to invest in capabilities that is going to allow you to satisfy the consumer demand and the new vehicles in the future. And I think that 350 could be the direction we're heading. That's what I'm hearing from a lot of OEMs, and that's what I'm hearing from a lot of the articles I've been reading. It is more expensive, and so having to find, working with your utility provider to ensure that you have the power to supply that type of charging apparatus, and they're willing to partner with you to make that happen is important. And the more wattage you are offering, the higher your cost of infrastructure is going to be. And so it really takes some diligence to look at what your options are and understand what the overall scope of opportunities might be.
Are ICE manufacturers looking for more efficiency of engine performance or efficiency of mileage? And do you think renewable fuels can meet that need for increased octane?
So I think the internal combustion engine manufacturers are looking at reducing emissions. So, and by reducing emissions, you're improving efficiency. And what's happened over the last several years, and I was actually testified for Congress a couple years ago and had somebody present a report next to me. So, we have been gaining efficiency in the internal combustion engine for years, but the automakers have been converting that efficiency into performance because that's what the customers wanted. And so we've left some efficiency on the table, but the standards for efficiency are not a miles per gallon standard. That's how we talk about them. They're a greenhouse gas reduction standard. And so the automakers are looking at how do we reduce emissions. MPG efficiency is one way, improving other efficiency, energy consumption areas within the vehicle is another way. In terms of octane, if we were to go to an optimized engine for higher octane, yes, I think renewable fuels can help. The study we did modeled what it would take to deliver different octane levels using E10, E20, and E30. And if we look at a 98 RON scenario, which is today's 93 pump octane, when you use the anti-knock index formula, I think you can deliver a 98 RON with an E20 at a lower cost than you could with E10. That's absolutely clear. Now you run into compatibility issues. Is the equipment compatible to store and dispense it? Are the vehicles, the fuels being put into compatible with the E20 blend? There's a lot of those issues. And then what comes first? The fuel, the vehicle? Do you mandate new vehicles to run on the high octane fuel, or do you make them optimized as an option? How do you do that? How do you create consumer demand to justify the conversion of fuel to a E20 formulation? All those things are tough questions and logistical considerations, but I do believe on a technical perspective, we could deliver a high octane fuel with a mid-level ethanol blend that could satisfy the performance requirements, reduce the emissions, and provide a higher octane fuel at a lower cost on a per gallon basis from a production standpoint. But then you got to think about what the infrastructure costs are to balance that out. And it's a trade-off. And I think there is a way to figure that out, but I'm not sure what that way is, and I'm not sure that there's the will right now to make it happen, because I think most people are saying, look, if we're going to provide a high octane vehicle, we want everybody to provide a high octane vehicle. We want everybody to have to run on a high octane fuel. Well, now you have to make sure that high octane fuel is available. So you start getting into some pretty heavy government approaches, which is difficult to get through. I was a lobbyist for 15 years, and moving legislation is not easy. So moving that type of initiative is pretty challenging, but the technology does exist, and there is an opportunity for biofuels to play a bigger role.
How does oil demand outlook vary by geographic region?
Geographic region globally, obviously very different. It all depends on your population, all depends on the composition of your fleet, what your policies are. In the domestic US, look at the population centers. You're going to have higher oil demand in the concentrated areas where there's a lot more population. If you're in Wyoming, Montana, you're driving further, but there's not as many cars, so your demand for refined products can be lower. If you're in California, even though they're pushing for a low carbon fuel market and electrified market, you're still having a high demand for oil products. New England, same thing. So you follow where the population is, and that's where you're going to get your demand for all energy sources, whether it be petroleum or electricity. Demand centers are your heavy area. Your population centers are your heavy demand areas. Same globally. Africa doesn't have nearly the oil demand as Europe and Asia and the US. Now there's Latin America. And so you have to look at how the population is dispersed.
Have you seen any statistics on car buying during this coronavirus stay-at-home period?
I saw one this morning, and it's scary. Ward's Auto does a monthly analysis of light-duty vehicle market sales, and they do a statistically annually adjusted forecast for the end of the year. Up and through February, the SAR, or the rate, if it continued for the end of the year, would have put us at a 16.8, 16.7 million units sold. If you take this last month's sales rate, it drops it down to, I think, 13. There has been a huge drop-off in sales. And I think that's reflected in what the automakers are doing. You're seeing a lot of 0% financing for 84 months, no payments for 3 months. You're seeing a lot of, we will bring the cars to you so you can test them at home. You don't have to come to the dealership. You're seeing a lot of focus on trying to resurrect this. And I mean, I think it's temporary. And I think it'll rebound once the lockdown is relieved. But the data I saw this morning was eye-opening. And we already were expecting a softening in new vehicle purchases this year. If the last couple of weeks and the next few weeks continue for a prolonged period of time, the impact on the OEM market could be very, very significant. And then the other thing is, I was talking to somebody today, when you go to buy a new car, you trade in your vehicle, a lot of those vehicles end up at auction. A lot of those auctions aren't open right now. They're not allowed to be open. There's too many people. So you're violating your 10-person maximum capacity. So the used vehicle auctions, if they're not operating, how are we valuing the trade-ins, and how are we moving that used vehicle market, which is a 42 million unit sold a year market? If you can't trade in your vehicle and they can't evaluate it appropriately, can't resell it in the auction market, then your ability to buy a new vehicle could be hurt. So there are a lot of avenues, a lot of factors playing into that. The next 2 months are going to be critical. And again, like I said, I think it'll work itself out, and I think we'll recover. I don't think we're in dire long-term situation here, but the short-term impacts are going to be significant.
Thanks, John. Do we have any last questions from attendees? Feel free to type in your questions. We really appreciate you staying through the end. Hope we were able to deliver some valuable content to everybody.
And now, as everybody now knows, my daughter's name is Olivia. So I appreciate your patience on that.
Oh, one last question. Do you think coronavirus has a high chance of changing the behavior of companies with home office and then also in fuel consumption?
I do. I think the chance is there. I worked for an organization that did not have work from home policy. Fuels Institute does have a work from home policy. We work remotely most of the time, but I know organizations who have not, that are forced to, and they're realizing that you don't necessarily sacrifice productivity, that the technology that's available for remote interaction, all the schools in Virginia are closed for the rest of the year. My daughter's doing remote learning in kindergarten on the computer every day. So we're starting to realize that these tools that have been available for a long time, just only moderately used, they are pretty efficient. And I think that as we look at, this is a virus now. There may be other viruses in the future as we try to limit human interaction to prevent the spread of any type of illness, whether it be the flu or the common cold. We try to improve lifestyles, quality of life, reduce congestion and commuting. That could result in an increase in telecommuting, which would have an impact on fuel demand. And, you go back 2 months, the number one issue in transportation wasn't oil prices, it wasn't coronavirus, it was emissions, it was the environment. If you reduce travel, you reduce emissions. So this could be an impetus to restructuring of our travel patterns, which could have broad implications, positive and negative, for a wide swath of stakeholders that we haven't even really started contemplating yet.
And somebody also asked if you think there will be more ICE bans globally.
Yeah, I think so. I think, we did a report about 2 years ago on global initiatives. And what I found from reading that was everybody's trying to solve the same problem. And they're looking globally for lessons and examples. And when they see things that look like they're valid, they try them. So I do believe we'll see more ICE bans, mostly on the local level. I don't think we're going to see too many on the large countrywide level, but community level, I think you can see cities implementing ICE bans or even, mobility, private vehicle bans. I don't think they're going to gain a lot of traction anytime soon, but it's always something to look at because they gain a lot of attention, and how they impact the market is something very important to pay attention to, because we need to use those markets that are experimenting with it as lessons to educate regulators and policymakers and other jurisdictions about what makes sense and what doesn't, which is why the Fuels Institute commissioned a report just 2 months ago evaluating about 30 different initiatives designed to address environmental emissions from the transportation sector, to look at their viability, their impact on controlling emissions, their impact on economics, so have a better understanding of what the menu of options are available to the policymakers as they try to address these large global issues on emissions. And I think it's important to learn from one another to go forward.
Thanks, John. And one last question. You mentioned how more people have been working from home can affect consumption and miles traveled. Do you see college schooling also possibly being impacted in this way in the future?
I think everything is possible. I think, in Virginia, we had 18 snow days built into the lower education system. If you have effective remote distance learning, do you need snow days? I think you could see more distance learning at the university level, especially when you think about some of these college campuses that are tripling up their dorm rooms to satisfy the registered attendees. Remote distance education in the university level has been going on for a long time, and those schools are getting a lot more credibility over the last 5 to 10 years. And I think this experience we're going through is going to give more credibility to this as a platform for learning. That could dramatically reduce the cost of a higher education, which could open the door for a lot more people to get that higher degree and get that advanced training that is going to contribute to economic growth in the future. So I think right now it's too early to say anything's off the table. I think everything is on the table for evolution and some change in how we conduct our business and how we conduct our social interactions going forward.
Thanks so much. So everybody's been asking for your presentation. So a copy of the webinar is going to be posted on our website in the near future. And also we will make sure to email out the PDF deck for you after the webinar.
Thank you, guys. Everybody have a great afternoon. Stay safe, and let us know if you have any questions going forward.
Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Bye.